Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Mayer. I'm happy to announce that Rabbi Kessin has agreed to teach his method of learning. This is a very unique and special opportunity to acquire his skills and tools for analyzing anything. We will be using Mishnayos Baba Kama as the reference for applying these principles. If you're interested in joining this new class, click the link below to be added to the Shir WhatsApp group. For any questions, contact me at 314-518-3699. The information will be below the video. Don't miss out.
So repeat the phone call. Repeat your phone.
314-518-3699.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I'm going to say mazel tov. You know, what happened is I don't really think that you people really truly appreciate what happened this week. On November 5th, Donald Trump was elected the 47th President of the United States. And, you know, all of you think that this is, I hope that most of you appreciate what happened and so on. But this is far more than you realize. Because I'm going to explain to you, sir, to some extent, some very powerful concepts of why God did this to America. But in any case, what you see is that the shefa, the influence that that heaven has put on earth, which is called the Geulah, has fundamentally even started. It is, I believe, I'm going to say, making a very powerful announcement that in a certain sense, it's the beginning of the Geulah, because the Geulah itself represents a reversal of all the things that are bad and evil. And what America's been going through in the last 4 years is downright destructive and to a basic extent evil. And I don't know if you realize this, because the fact that the borders were open and allowing every person to come into America, no matter what his status, if he's a criminal, if he's an evil person and so on, whatever it is, these people were all allowed to come into America and contaminate the population of America. And also another thing which was occurring is the fact that trillions of dollars were spent and given out completely without a limit. And this was, it's called deflation. If you want to know the origin of the inflation, it's because it's not that things have become more expensive, or that's the way it appears to a person living in America. What has actually happened is that money became much less value. So it's not that things became more expensive, it's that the value of money has decreased. Why? Because America started printing much more money than it could substantiate and even support. So when dollar bills are printed, it's simply to be able to afford to give it away to like Ukraine and wherever you want to do it, the value of money decreases. So that's why, since the value of money decreased, the value of everything else that it buys increased. So that's something else. And the justice system was completely contaminated because justice was used as a weapon called lawfare to simply destroy any of your enemies. So when these three things happen, when the border is open to America, letting anyone in that wants to come in without any kind of investigation or any kind of limit, that's the destruction of America. When money is printed, nonchalant, and so on, continuously, without any real support of that money, that's the destruction of the economy of America. And fundamentally, when the rule of law, the constitutional rule of law, is completely ignored and law is used as a weapon, so the basis of America, which is the Bill of Rights and the laws which protect each individual, is completely discounted. So these three different activities is fundamentally lead to the destruction of the American dream. And what most people don't realize, that America is not simply a stage in the evolution of America. America is an evolution in the history of mankind, because never in human history was the American gift given to mankind. And what is the fundamental gift of America? If I would ask you, what is the special significance of America that's so remarkable and clearly indicates that it's a gift from God? And I don't think that many people can answer, so I will tell you my opinion on the matter. The most unusual thing about America is one basic principle. It's called the Bill of Rights. And what does that mean? What the Bill of Rights fundamentally does, it gives every citizen the ability to sue the government. That's right. Such a possibility never existed in human history, because governments were controlled by monarchs, by emperors and dictators. And fundamentally, your ability to resurrect justice was not available. So the gift of America is that an ordinary citizen of a country had the ability and the right that if he felt a victim of injustice, he would be able to sue the government of the country. And this is absolutely remarkable. Such a gift has never been given to the citizens of any country. In every country in the world, in all of human history, it was always the government or the king or the emperor or whoever it was, the dictator, that controlled completely the people in it. The people in the country were never really considered humans in a sense. They were considered objects to service to the government and the king and all the rulers. But for the first time in human history, that was completely changed, because a system was created through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that simply said, no, the one who controls the country and the one where everything is devoted to is the citizens of the country, and they have the power. And this concept, which is exemplified in the laws, which allow a regular citizen to sue the government and actually have standing in a court of law, is completely miraculous. And this is what America is. So the question really was, for the last 4 years, all these fundamental rights were really trampled on. And there was a serious question if America could survive. But the fact of the matter is, America did survive. Why? Because we realized one thing very important. The one who rules the world with absolute sovereignty is God. And God created the universe, which is astounding in its implications and in its breadth. And God does not want, and God created mankind so that he can coexist with God. That's the purpose of creation. And if anyone thinks that God is going to give up his creation because of the selfishness and the greed and the lust for power for regular people, you have a big thing, a big mistake. It is the will of God against the will of power-hungry men. And mankind has absolutely no power whatsoever to control the destiny of the universe and the destiny of existence. And God will not give up on his creations, because he has very high regard for his creations, and that is for mankind. So therefore, what happened this week is really unusual and phenomenal, that God has suddenly intervened and said, no, you will not destroy America. You think that you will. You think you will put God aside and simply control the destiny of mankind. You have a complete false dream in your mind, because I am the power of all existence, not you. And I want to save my world and eventually eternalize my world so mankind will share his coexistence with me. And that's my intention, and that's what's going to be. And God clearly demonstrated this in front of us all, and we saw this clearly. If anything, what God has demonstrated is power in terms of who he is and what he has done. And nothing will contradict that power. So a big hearty mazel tov to what do you call it, to President Trump, and to the fact that God has decided to intervene and to save America. And by saving America, he is saving the world. Because what no one really realizes, and this is frightening, when you suddenly want to destroy this gift that America gave, you are not simply destroying America. No, when you enter heaven someday and you pass before God, God will accuse you not of wanting to destroy America. You are not an enemy of America. You are an enemy of the world, the entire world. Why? Because America, with its gift of honesty and humility, and its gift that it recognizes the value of a human being, is so important that you are destroying the world. Because fundamentally, America is to some extent the super cop of the world. Whenever there's some injustice in the world, America, in one way or another, usually comes to the assistance. It comes to the assistance of all nations that suddenly are in danger in some way from either the world by nature or some kind of danger. And therefore, America is a central country, not because it's the richest country in the world. No, the greatness of America lies in its single value, that the human being, this specific individual, is more important than the entire universe, and that everything was created for him. And therefore, to endanger the American dream is to endanger the survival of the universe. And this will be what the accusation will be. You know, everyone should be forewarned that what he has done, he has fundamentally provided the accusation, that the accusation will not be that you tried to destroy America, but that you just tried to destroy the world. And if you want to confront that accusation, well, go ahead and see how far you can get. So what's really demanded and what should be done is that everyone from this party of the left should really think over what they've done and what they wanted to do, that they only considered their own destiny of power, and they did not consider God's destiny of sharing eternity with man. In any case, what I'm going to talk about today is extremely important, because I'm going to talk about a principle which is really basically unknown. It is unknown. It has never really been truly pointed out as a principle in Hashkafa and so on and so forth. But it probably is the single most important principle of all in the Torah. It is fundamentally the activating dynamic of the Torah itself, but it's hardly noticed. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. We know that when God created the world, he created the first man, Adam and Eve, and so on. And Adam and Eve were very special people. Why? Because God really never had the intention to create mankind, the species called mankind. God never truly had an intention for Adam and Eve to expand and suddenly produce other individuals who were their derivative, it was their children. God's intent was only to create Adam and Eve, because Adam and Eve were really the parallels to Olam Haba, the eternal world. He wanted to give them the possibility that they could coexist with God. But in order to coexist with God for eternity, God demanded a certain effort on mankind. And God demanded that Adam Rishon, the first man and his wife, should correct the problem of Namdik Sufa. And what is that problem? That problem is what? That because man has self-awareness and is fundamentally focused on himself, mankind sees God as a duality. In other words, he sees himself as outside of God, because his self-awareness comes from the word me, and when he sees God, he says you. So therefore, mankind, by virtue of his self-awareness, sees the concept of me, you. which is simply seeing the following truth, that just like what God is outside of man, man is outside of God. So therefore, mankind sees himself in an extraordinarily powerful position. He is the only one that he's aware of that has free will. In other words, he can choose to conform to whatever God wants, or he can choose to deny and reject whatever God wants. Why? Because he is independent of God. It is true that mankind agrees that God created everything, because the principle of design indicates that the world has a creator without a question. But once he was created, mankind believes that he is outside of God. He is independent of God. And therefore, in a certain sense, he is free from the demands of God. And this concept is totally false. That it's true that self-awareness gives one a kind of independence of God. But that independence is an illusion. It's not really real. It's an illusion, because everything that man does depends only on God. Mankind is not free from the power of God. In fact, we say that every time a person moves, we say that he moved, but that's not true. Because no human being understands how he moves his body, how he digests his food, how he circulates blood throughout the system. Mankind is oblivious of the function of the human body. So therefore, who is doing it all? Who moves the body? The answer is God. So the only thing that man can do is accept the fact that everything is in the hands of God. And when we say God controls everything, we mean everything without exception. And Chazal say this, the sages of Israel say this, that the only thing in the hands of man is what? Is not really movement, or it's nothing. Man, you cannot get up from your chair. You cannot move the muscles in your body to suddenly get up from the chair, because you have no idea. You have the will, and suddenly you execute the action. But how did you do that? You don't know, because you are not in control of that. So just merely to simply raise yourself from your chair needs someone else to work your body. And who works your body? You think the body works itself? No, it doesn't. It's the power of God. So therefore we see the true power of God in terms of what really goes. And this is what God wants man to realize, that even though his self-awareness means that he sees himself outside of God, he is not outside of God. God is completely inside of him. And that's the truth. And God demands that man follow this. So therefore what God gave man were certain commandments. And by keeping those commandments, mankind declares a relationship with God. What does it mean, a relationship with God? A relationship with God simply means this: God has no outside. That's right. Even though it feels like he has an outside, because you have an outside, you have something outside of you, and you see something outside of you, so you believe God has an outside too. After God created you, you are his outside, but that's not true. Because God is inside every human being. He is in the mind of every human being. The thoughts of every man is the thoughts of God in the person. So God has no outside. And why does God want man to understand this? Because if man thinks that God is outside, therefore he will think that he possesses some kind of power which contrasts that of God. And if man thinks that, he will actually say to God, well, I thank you because you want me to coexist with you, but I don't need you, because now that you've created me, I am independent of you, and therefore I can rely on myself to exist. So therefore I don't need your Olam Haba or the future world. So therefore God created man so great in the sense that he actually thinks that he is outside of God, that he will reject Olam Haba. And no one really understands this, but that's the real purpose. Mankind thinks that he doesn't need God to give him energy or power to coexist with him. He can do it on his own now that he has been created. And this is completely false. And God says you must understand what the truth is, because only then will you accept that your coexistence with me is up to me. It's not up to you. So this quality of independence gives you the false conclusion that you can exist beyond me, besides myself. And this false conclusion will prevent you from accepting your coexistence with me. So the way you can accept this, that what you need me to coexist with, is I'm going to give you a commandment that you should not do something with your body. He said, in this case, what God said to Adam and Eve, he said to them, you cannot eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Because if you eat from that, you will be defying me and rejecting what I want. And in my mind, that's what establishes the true relationship between you and me. By listening to what I say, you suddenly will understand who is in charge and who's really in control. And in that relationship which is formed by you observing my commandment, you will earn the ability to coexist with me, because you will not reject Olam Haba. You will accept it as my gift to you. And this is the purpose of man and why God created the physical universe. God created the physical universe to give man the belief that man is outside of God. But this is a falsity. This is not true. And only when man realizes this truth will suddenly this happen. So this is fundamentally the thing. But Adam failed. He failed because he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and therefore he failed to develop a relationship with God. So according to the principle of justice, he therefore was condemned. He should have been what? He didn't earn death, because death is not what God wants. The principle of justice says if you defy God and you don't establish a relationship, you have to be annihilated. You know what annihilation is? Annihilation is that you and your self-awareness do not exist anymore. That's what goes into non-existence, your very self-awareness. And that's the principle of justice says, because you no longer connected to God, because you don't believe that God fundamentally is absolutely independent of you and outside of you. There is nothing outside of him. So since Adam failed to do this, he failed to keep the mitzvah, the principle of justice demanded what? That Adam and Eve should be annihilated, and that's the end of the dream that God had to give Adam and Eve eternity. So the question is, why wasn't Adam annihilated? So the reason is, it's very hard for us to understand, but God created him. He created Adam and Eve. And in his creation, we are his children. And God loves his children in a way that we cannot even fathom. We cannot even begin to imagine the kind of love that God has. So what God says is, even though Adam and Eve became worthy of annihilation, I will not apply the principle of justice, but rather I will apply the principle which is called the rachamim, or mercy. Please, all of you, you have to mute your phone. So therefore, what God applied was the principle of mercy. And what is the principle of mercy? What does it really present? What does it represent? So most people think that God is merciful, God is kind and merciful, and therefore God forgives our sins. That is completely untrue. God cannot really forgive your sins because your sins have a meaning. What your sin's meaning is that you're saying to God, well, I'm going to sin and I'm going to defy God. Well, once you defy God, you defy his gift of Olam Haba, or for eternity. So that's why God wants you to remove that by developing a relationship. But God applies the principle of mercy, not because he's a good guy. You see, most people think that God is good. It's not that he's good. It's that you're his child, And God loves you with an immense form of love. And that's what produces mercy. Not only that, there's something even deeper than that. Where does the principle of mercy come from? Well, it comes from the fact that God realizes, in a certain sense, that he is partly responsible for your sin. That's right. How do we know this? Because it says on Rosh Chodesh, God brings a certain sacrifice for himself. And why does God have to bring a sacrifice, which is chatas, on Rosh Chodesh? Why? Because in a certain way, God realizes that he, certain way, provided the possibility that man could destroy himself. He enabled it. To some extent, God is an enabler. Because by making this fundamental to the human being, please mute your phone. So God realized by enabling you, by giving you the possibility of defying him, you're actually putting yourself in danger. Or rather, he is putting you in danger. But he had to do that because you are so close to the divine that you can annihilate yourself. So therefore, that's why God is merciful. Because he has to take on the responsibility that he enabled you on a certain level. So therefore, what God does is he not only applies the principle of justice, he applies the principle of mercy. Now, exactly what is the principle of mercy? What is the idea behind mercy? How can God forgive your rejection of him and your rejecting of the gift of eternity? How does he do it? Does he simply say, I forgive you? No, he doesn't simply say, I forgive you. Because having rejected God, in a certain sense, God cannot absolve you from that declaration. So exactly, how does he do it? So the answer is the following, I believe. And this is the most fundamental principle, in a certain sense, in Kol HaTorah Kula. What God did as soon as Adam sinned is that he made something which never existed before. Initially, even though Adam was supposed to have derivatives, he's supposed to have sons, certain sons and daughters and so on from Adam. Adam was separated from his wife. His wife was created from him so that he can reproduce with his wife and produce derivatives or other people. Adam was supposed to have other people, but these people were not supposed to be regular human beings. They were not supposed to be self-aware and independent so that they have free will. That's right. Originally, what the Ramchal says is that God wanted to create mankind, and mankind would simply be an extension of Adam Rishon. What does that mean, an extension? They would simply be a manifestation of God's unity on some level, but they would not be regular people with free will. The only one that was supposed to have free will, which he can choose about what his belief in God is Adam and Eve. That's all. So people were supposed to be created, but these people were not an extension. So they were not an extension where they became the species of mankind. But the principle of mercy demanded a new creation, that no longer would Adam and Eve be the equivalent of Olam Haba. Olam Haba, which is eternity, coexistence with God, would no longer be the prime possession of one man, Adam. No, it wasn't. Suddenly God said, I'm going to make from you, Adam and Eve, not only a single ownership of Olam Haba of eternity, but I'm going to make of you a species, mankind. That's right. God suddenly decided to make from Adam mankind, where each individual person who would derive from Adam and Eve would have their own ability to choose exactly the same kind of choice that Adam had. Each person would have his own free will. That's right. So therefore, Olam Haba, or the future world, was not anymore a possession of one man. It was a possession of mankind. Now, what's the distinction of mankind? What does that do? Well, that's a completely different matter. Because the essence is not that God created mankind. That's not. It's the nature of mankind. And what is that? The nature of mankind as a species, as a group, is really what's called an organism. And you have to understand the nature of an organism. When you have one person as the sole representative of what? Of Olam Haba, then you only have one person. So there's no such thing as mankind. There's such a thing called Adam. Adam was the sole representative of mankind and was the owner. He was supposed to possess the future of eternity, which is beyond time and space and substance. But he was supposed to be the owner of Olam Haba. But God changed that and suddenly made from Adam mankind and so on. But in making mankind, what God developed was called childhood. Adam was first created. He was not a child. He was the equivalent of a 20-year-old. And as a 20-year-old, he had full free will to decide exactly what his relationship with God would be. But Adam himself was a sole representative and possessor of Olam Haba. But after the sin, God decided to make from Adam mankind, which means that every person that would come from him, and all mankind comes from Adam, because we were all really a thought in his mind. Every human being that was ever made was simply part of Adam's mind. He was like a thought, another thought in Adam's mind. How did this represent itself? We have no idea. At first, there was no such thing called mankind. There was only such a thing called Adam. But when God decided to make mankind, every person in mankind separated from Adam, and the human being as a species was created. And this represented the first act of mercy. That's right. The fact that God suddenly dispersed Adam and Eve so that Adam would have mankind as a reproduction from him was the original act of mercy and the final act of mercy. Well, the question is how? How is this possible? Because you have to understand the fundamental principle of mankind is the term an organism. So you have to understand what an organism is. What exactly is an organism? Well, if you look at the human body is an organism. Which that means that even though the human body is composed of different organs, each one having a different function. For example, the liver, the kidneys, and the heart all have different functions, you know. But in terms of their ability to coexistence, all their functions unite to form one main function. The primary function of the human body is an engine that allows man to live. Life comes from the organism called the human body, which is composed of separate organs, each having a separate function, but the fundamental purpose of all of them is the same. It's to allow a person to exist. It's allow him to eat and derive energy. He allows that the body which produces the energy then can distribute the energy to the whole body. It allows the possibility of self-awareness. So the human body is really one body, and that's what an organism is. The central attribute of an organism is different than the central attribute of a member of a club. In a club, you have different people representing a club. Each one is a member. But a membership is different than an organism. Why? Because in an organism, every member knows every other member, even though he has never met him. That's right. In the human body, every organ, every cell in the human body, the trillions of cells that inhabit the human body all know each other and can identify each other as part of the same organism, even though they've never seen. Because let's say the cells in the liver never see the cells in the heart. They are two separate organisms at different locations, so they never meet, but yet they know each other. If they did meet, they would instantly know that they are part of the same organism. So therefore, an organism is a club where every member knows each one, even though they never meet, because they know they all contribute to the same purpose. And how do we know this is true? Well, we know this because if the body needs a new organ, let's say, for example, you have a liver, and the liver has certain tumors or cancer. So therefore, you have to replace the liver. So where do you get the new liver? You get it from another human being. So if another human being passes away, you take his liver and give it to the person who needs a new liver. But what does the body do as soon as it takes in the new liver? It says, I don't want this liver. But you say to the body, you need this liver. You need this new liver, or else you won't be able to live. So the body says miraculously, I don't care. I want my liver, M-Y, my liver. So therefore the body will reject every new cell which is put into it, which is designed to replace the old cell, which is now diseased. That's right. The body automatically rejects any new cell or surely any new organism that wasn't originally part of it at birth, because it is not his liver. So that means that the body actually knows what belongs to it and what doesn't belong to it, even though it never saw that. And that's the concept of an organism. An organism has such a principle of unity. There's such an actus in terms of a body that it knows automatically and instinctively exactly every cell that was ever a part of it. And it doesn't learn this by learning it. It knows it. It knows this. It knows this intuitively. And therefore, it will reject any new cell or new organ that's brought into the body. So what they have to give the body of a person who gets a transplant medication, that it reduces the immune system so that the immune system will not reject the new organ. And that person has to take this medication for the rest of his life. Or else the organ, the new organ that was put inside the body will not function. The body will reject it as an alien organ. So we see the power of an organism. So what God decided to do to initiate the activity of the act of mercy is to create the human being not as a single individual who has to go to Olam Haba, but as an organism that has to go to Olam Haba. Olam Haba, the future world, the future destiny of eternity, was now the designation that it was owned by an organism, not by a single individual. So by God making mankind into a species, into many, many people, God created the new concept of an organism. And how does this work? Well, now that what you call Olam Haba is there, so therefore it makes it much easier for a person to survive even though he sins. That's right. That's the idea behind an organism. Why? Because since an organism is so unified that it knows itself totally, he knows every cell in the organism, that even though it hasn't met it, it therefore has a certain unity that can give every cell in that organism Olam Haba. Because Olam Haba is not a possession of a single individual. It is now a possession of an organism. So therefore, the most important expression of the act of mercy is really organismic unity. So therefore, if one person does a mitzvah and another person does a sin, the person who does a mitzvah, because he has an organismic relationship with the human, with the souls of all men, because all the soul of all men, every man individually, is now connected to every other soul in the organism called a man, because all men, every man on living on earth in human history, it doesn't make a difference who he is, whether he's Jewish or non-Jewish, if he's a black person, Hispanic, an Indian, an Asian, it doesn't make a difference who he is. He is part of the organism because he is a family that has one father, and that father is God. And God says to each one, now that you're an organism, now I can save you all. Because fundamentally, if one part of the organism doesn't reject God, accepts the sovereignty of God, so therefore his acceptance of God as his creator really applies to every aspect of the organism. So even a person who rejects God in a certain sense, he is saved because of his because of its connection to another part of the organism. So since Olam Haba is a possession that applies to the organism in total, everyone can appreciate, can benefit from this absolute unity of an organism. And in doing so, God can save mankind from its sins. So even though part of your organism does sins, and to technically rejected, since Olam Haba is the possession of an organism, one part of the organism can preserve Olam Haba eternity for another part of the organism, so that the other part of the organism that sins benefits from the other part that doesn't sin. So an organism allows sharing. The key word is sharing, because you two belong to the same body, which is a complete unity. Therefore, you can share in the destiny of the one who's good, the one who does the mitzvahs. So in creating mankind as an organism, God can save many aspects of mankind. So he can save many aspects of the organism. He can save to a large extent those people who reject him by virtue of the zchus or the merit of those people who do not reject him, who accept God. So this is the key to the act of mercy, and we don't understand this. Klal Yisrael never understood it in its human history. He never understood that fundamentally every Jew is connected to the organism called a Jew. Not only that, when the Jews sin en masse, as long as they remain an organism, they can be saved. So therefore, all of human history is nothing more than the continuous display of the unity of mankind. It says in the Torah, and you shall love your neighbors yourself, for you are ahavta l'reacha kamocha. And the reason why, because God says this. God says, as long as you act as an organism where you love each other, you're kind to each other, you do not speak lashon hara, slander, and so on, you do not denigrate other Jews. As long as there's a fundamental unity between Jews, I will preserve you as an organism. And as an organism, you will have Olam Haba. But the moment you begin to what? Detest each other. The moment you begin to demonstrate contempt for each other, the moment you speak lashon hara and sinat chinam, unwanted hatred, the moment you are jealous of each other, the moment that you jealous each other, and the moment that you cheat each other, rob from each other. In other words, when you break the entity of an organism between every Jew, that's when you're in trouble. That's when you're in trouble, when you defy me. So as long as you are kind to each other and you love each other, I will always preserve you through the power of the organism. And I will not annihilate you. That's what God said. So the principle of God's unity is upheld by the principle of the organismic unity. When the organism remains one, the whole organism survives. It survives to the people who are not evil or responsible and have a relationship with God. So the mitzvah of that you should love your neighbors yourself really is the foundation for the mitzvah of that you should love God. The love of God is now dependent not on the action of a single individual, but the love of God is dependent on the actions of an organism. And all you have to do is maintain the unity of an organism by loving each other, by being kind to each other, by being careful not to damage each other. By doing all of these things, you maintain the integrity of the organism. And God says, if you maintain the integrity of the organism, I will maintain the integrity of all of you in Olam Haba. That's right. That's how important Avos Yisrael is. And the Jewish people have never understood that in human history. At certain times, they were able to be together. They were able to honor each other and with dignity, but they never really understood what that means. That's the action, the active principle of what? Of mercy. That's the fundamental idea behind mercy. That mankind is not simply an individual, mankind is an organism. And therefore that can display the concept of an organism. So the main thing is now what? The main thing is how you treat another Jew or how you treat another human being. That's the main thing that God looks for to be able to preserve mankind. Why is that? Because the fundamental purpose of a Jew is to represent God. The Jew has to show the world that there is only one God. He is the messenger of what? Of monotheism. He is the messenger of the absolute singularity, the absolute unity of God. The Jew says to the non-Jew, there is only one God. And the fact that you believe in many gods, which is idol worship, is not true at all. It's a lie. There is only one God who was the creator of the entire universe and everything in it. It's the creator of the spiritual, the physical world, everything. All of this was done by one God. So then the non-Jew listens to the Jew and he says, that's interesting. I believe it sounds logical. And what happens? So suddenly the non-Jew follows the Jew around without informing the Jew. And he watches the Jew. And suddenly he sees him in his relationship with another Jew. And he sees that he's speaking Lashon Hara about him. He sees the other Jew cheating another Jew. And he says to himself, that something doesn't make sense. This Jew is a fraud because he says that there's one God. Okay, I can understand that and I can believe that. But wait a minute. If it's true that there's only one God, that means that he and another Jew are brothers because this one God is their father. He is a family. That's what it means that there's one God, that mankind fundamentally is a family, and therefore everyone is his brother and sister. So how come he's cheating another Jew? Why does he speak Lashon Hara? Why is there unwanted hatred between one Jew and another? It doesn't make sense. It contradicts what he said to me, that there's only one God. So therefore, since he's a fraud, I don't accept him, the fact that he says that there's one God. There's obviously many gods, because each human being is separate from another human being. So therefore, it's impossible for the Jewish people to truly project the message that there's only one God, Hashem Echad. So even though the Jew says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that there's only one God, he's lying. Because if the Goy looks at the Jew and his behavior and he sees the way he treats another Jew, he says, well, this is a fraud. So that's why, in order to what? To be a messenger to everyone that there's only one God, the Jew despoils that particular message. He destroys that message by the way he treats another Jew. The way a Jew treats another Jew with contempt is the absolute indication that he doesn't believe that there's one God himself, because that other Jew is his brother. So that's why God insists on Ahavas Yisrael. Why is God so obsessed with the idea that every Jew should love another Jew? Because he fundamentally says, if you don't love another Jew, then you cannot be a messenger for my unity. Nobody will believe you that I am only one God, because they see how you treat someone from your own body. This other Jew is part of your organism. So how could you treat him in such a way? Well, obviously, there's no such thing as an organism. The Jewish people are not an organism, and therefore there's not one God. So therefore, one mitzvah is connected completely to the mitzvah of the other mitzvah. The ability to love God and to believe in that love, because the fact that God is one, is connected to the idea that you are an organism with another Jew, and therefore you have to respect and love the other Jew as well. And the Jewish people have never clearly understood this. So therefore we find that the fundamental fact of human history is how God says, I have to maintain organism unity. In other words, what God has to do to the rest of human history, what's the fundamental activity in human history? What? The fundamental activity in human history is God has to in some way maintain the organismic unity, or else mankind has to be annihilated. That's right. Because the principle of mercy is dependent on organismic unity, and that's why God made mankind instead of man himself. Now, how does he do it? Well, if you look at human history, you will see every instance how God maintained what? How God maintained organismic unity in spite of the fact of what the Jews do with each other. And that's what I'd like to explain now. How does God do this? How does God make the Jewish people one into a certain unity, like an organism, even though they don't act that way? And why does God do that? Because if he doesn't do that, he cannot be merciful. Because mercy depends on the way one Jew treats another Jew. Mercy depends on the way one human being treats another human being. So the greatest destructive act of mankind, what is the greatest destructive act? It's not that it's not simply the fact that he robs or cheats. It's not simply the fact that it's much deeper than that. It's the way he sees another human being. If he sees another human being as a competitor, that's very bad. He has to see another human being as a brother and as a sister, because only that will preserve him if he sins, if he rejects God. So therefore, the main purpose in human history, the driving force in human history, is how does God maintain organismic unity? Because that's the only way God can be merciful. So all of human history demonstrates how God has to be conduct organismic unity. Well, let's see the first instance of this. When the Jews were in Egypt, when they were all in Egypt, while the brothers were all alive, there was a certain unity. But after a while, the Jews started worshiping the idols of Egypt. That's right. The Jews worshipped the Avodah Zorah, the idols of Egypt, the gods of Egypt, after a while, when all the brothers died. So therefore, how did God maintain the act of unity? Well, very simple. Because God fundamentally founded the principle of alternative unity. If you can't live together by loving each other and by honoring each other, then you will live together by being in pain together. That's right. So when I suddenly isolate you and I put you all in an act of pain, that suffering will atone for the fact that you are no longer unified. So that's why the Jews became slaves. You see, we think that God punished the Jews and made them slaves to Egypt. Why? Because they worshipped idols. No, that's not the reason. That's not the real reason. The real reason why the Jews became the slaves in Egypt, because the fact that the Egyptians punished them all as slaves and made them slaves means that the Egyptians when they saw the Jews, they saw them as an organism, and they punished the entire organism together. So even though the Jews could not live together, the Jews suffered together. So what happens if you can't live together by honoring your fellow Jew, you will suffer together. And they all suffered because they were Jewish. Why did the Jews suffer in Egypt? Because they were Jewish. And Egypt said, well, maybe he will join our enemy. So when the Jews cannot live together as brothers and sisters, they will live together as slaves. Because they're now being slaves, because that's how the Egyptians saw the Jewish people. So in other words, the punishment wasn't directly for the sin of Avodah Zarah. The punishment of slavery for all the Jews in Egypt was not necessarily driven by the fact that they worship idols. It was more driven by the fact that they were not unified. And God unified them, how? By making all the Jews as Jews slaves. So therefore there was a certain actor to the organism. There was an alternative unity. Since the Jews could not live together in peace and in love, they will live together enslaved, but they will be enslaved as Jews. So that would maintain the organismic unity. So therefore, if the Jews were not slaves in Egypt, they would have had to be annihilated. Because once the organismic unity diminishes or even disappears, that's the end of mercy. So God has to extend that mercy. How? By suddenly forcing the Jews to become one nation. So if you can become one nation because you love each other, if you can become a family by honoring and loving each other, you will become a family by sharing the same destiny. And that destiny is slavery. So we see an incredible concept that we've never really understood before. That the slavery was not simply for the idol worship. The slavery was to maintain a certain aspect of organismic unity so that God can apply the principle of mercy. A very different thing. And we see this in several other ways. And if I speak about these other ways, you will suddenly realize what God is doing. In other words, why doesn't the Mashiach come? Why doesn't God bring the redemption? And the answer is because the Jewish people are not one. There is no unity in the organism. So God has to impose unity. That's right, impose unity. He has to impose a organismic unity on the Jews, even though they don't act that way, because this allows mercy to go down to the world. And how do we see this? How do we see the imposition of unity so that God can exercise mercy? Because that's the whole reason why God made mankind into a species. Why did God do this? He went from one man to all of mankind. Why? So that he can impose mercy. And if the Jews cannot demonstrate the unity, he will impose the unity. So now let us see exactly how he does that. So fundamentally, the last 2,000 years, so the Jews have demonstrated a lack of unity. But the last 2,000 years, we see something new has happened. For the last 2,000 years, we see for the first time the Jewish people, their temple was destroyed, they were exiled from their country, and they were moved among all the Goyim. And what happened? The Goyim suddenly developed a new religion called Christianity, which saw the Jews as an enemy. And therefore, the fundamental faith of the Jews was suddenly in the hands of the Gentiles, the Goyim. And what did the Goyim do? Murder them, kill them. For the first time, the Jews began to experience what? They began to experience an inquisition. They began to be a target of the Goyim. So when they were in Spain and Portugal, there was an inquisition that exiled them all. And why? Because that's an expression of the imposition of unity. That's right. When the Jews can't live together and love each other, God says, okay, if you can't live together, so you will suffer together. That's the first step. So when the Jews cannot live together because they love each other, God says, I will impose a suffering on all of you because you are Jews. And that will be the manifestation of your unity. So that was the concept of the Inquisition. Then there's the concept of the Crusades. So the Crusaders, when they went through Europe, in many of the villages in Europe, they went through Jewish villages and they killed Jews left and right. The Crusaders killed many Jews along the way to go to Israel, to connect to Israel again. They wanted to reconquer Israel for the Christians, you see, because Jesus lived in Israel. But along the way from Europe to Israel, they killed many, many Jews. Why? So that was also an expression of unity, because God says, if you can't live together, you will die together. But you will die together, not because the Goyim had kindness on you individually. You will die together because that will be a manifestation of the unity of the Jewish people. So we see an absolute horror that when the Jews can't live together by loving each other and by honoring each other, they will live together by dying for each other. That's right. The Goyim suddenly rise up and become anti-Semites. and they murdered Jews. So that was the concept of the Crusades, and that's also the concept of pogroms. Why are there pogroms? Why is that in every nation in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, and so on and so forth? And why is that in all over the world? Everyone hated the Jew. Why? Why are the Jews excluded? Why are the Goyim always successful in killing Jews? You see, we say, why are the Goyim, why are the Gentiles anti-Semites? Why? So we say, because they're jealous of the Jews. But that's not really true. Because the Goyim may hate Jews because they're jealous of the Jews. They're jealous of their belief in one God. That is true. But that's not what's happening. Because the Goyim not only hate the Jews, they are successful in killing the Jews. Who gives them that success? God. It was the real question is not why the Gentiles are anti-Semites. The real question is, why are they allowed to express their anti-Semitism in murder, in pogroms, inquisitions, crusades? Why are the Goyim always given to success to intimidate the Jews into killing them and robbing them? So the question is the question that must be addressed to God himself. Why does God allow this? And the answer is, why? He allows this as an alternative form of unity. Because if you can't live together with honoring and loving each other, you will die together. That's right. That's the new concept of organismic unity. Because don't forget, organismic unity means what? It means that God can therefore be a merciful God. But he has to have some demonstration of organismic unity, that Claudius will love each other and become an organism and become inseparable from each other. And since this cannot be established by the fact the way Jews treat each other with lashon hara continuously. When the Gemara says that sinas chinam, unwanted hatred between one to another, is the single reason why the Mashiach doesn't come. It's why. It's not that the Mashiach doesn't come because of that. It's that the Mashiach cannot come. Because the Mashiach can only come fundamentally. The Geulah can only come when what? When the Jews are united, when there's organismic unity, because that is the fundamental basis for the act of mercy. And if that doesn't exist, then mercy must demonstrate itself by forming a unity of the Jewish people as they die together. Since every pogrom is an attack on Jews because they are Jews, there's a certain unity that's established through those acts of murder. So this is the reason why. Because the way we treat another Jew has a direct implication and a direct effect on how God will be merciful to us. God will not be merciful to us in a form where we can tolerate, when suddenly we act in a way which is hateful to other Jews. So therefore, in order to extend mercy, God must deal with organismic unity in a different form. And the form that he's chosen is fundamentally, if you can't live together as Jews, then you will die together as Jews. But you will die as Jews. The Goyim will hate you because you are Jews. And that's your unity. But there's another question. In the Holocaust, what was the Holocaust? 6 million Jews were killed by Adolf Hitler and the Germans. What was that about? Well, that's a further alternative form of unity. That's right. Because what happened? These Jews died fundamentally. Why? Because they fundamentally had contempt for each other. Ashkenazim defied Sephardim. Hasidim defied Misnagdim. There was a tremendous lack of respect and love among the Jewish people. So for some reason we don't know the truth of the souls of the Jews, but they were all allowed to die under the hands of Hitler. Why? Because this was designed to save all the other Jews that didn't die from the Holocaust. Why? Because it's an amazing concept. You see it. What happened? When the Jews heard about the Holocaust. When they finally learned about the Holocaust, after what? After in 1945, what did the Jews feel about God? That they realized God allowed 6 million Jews, men, women, and children, to die. Well, fundamentally, they hated God. They said, how could he do this to the Jewish people who've always tried to be loyal to him? Yes, they were loyal to him, but they were not loyal to each other. And therefore, they failed to be an organism. And once you fail to be an organism, you cannot benefit from God's mercy. So the only way you can benefit from God's mercy is if some level of organismic unity is established. And in this case, it had to be established because Hitler hated a Jew. Hitler did not care if you were an Ashkenaz, or if you were Sfard, if you were Chassid, or you were Snagin. He didn't care what kind of Jew you were. You were Jewish, and therefore you died. So the unity that Hitler saw in his own eyes became the unity which activated the principle of mercy. But the Holocaust had another purpose, you see, because what happened? Because many Jews no longer believed in God. That's right. Many Jews said, this is impossible. If God allows the Jews to die so en masse, I don't believe in God. So therefore, what the Holocaust has created is not only the death of Jews, but really it destroyed the religion, the spirituality of many, many Jews. And many Jews gave up Judaism. But you know, God said, I don't mind. I don't mind if the Jews hate me. That's right. Could you imagine that? God, who's the Father, said, I don't mind if the Jews hate me. But since they care about the fact that 6 million Jews died, they still have a unity. And this is absolutely astounding. We do not understand or comprehend to what extent God will go to establish an alternative unity when the Jews are not unified. And what we see is absolutely amazing, that God actually, by killing 6 million Jews, caused many Jews to leave the religion. But God knew that, and they didn't really have free will when they did it. But why did he allow that? Because even that demonstrated suddenly that they cared about Jews. They were very concerned that so many Jews died in the Holocaust. So therefore, at the same time that the Holocaust promoted the fact that they were angry at God, it also promoted the fact they were now unified. They now cared about the 6 million Jews who died. So that demonstration is what God needed to have continuous mercy on them and give them the land of Israel. Because the land of Israel was given back to them after 2,000 years. Why? Only because they were angry at him. And God said, better they should be angry at me, even though I'm their father, and still demonstrate that they care about other Jews, their brothers and sisters. And every Jew who was angry at God also demonstrated his caring and his affection for the Jews. That how could God kill 6 million Jews? We cannot comprehend this. But you see, God demonstrated that he suffered himself, kaviyachol, so to speak. Because God said, even though I will do something which has caused the Jewish people to be enraged at me, okay, I will do it. And why I will do it? Because that alone will demonstrate a unity of the Jews. That will create a unity of the Jews, that because their brothers and sisters died at the hands of Hitler and in concentration camps in the ovens, that anger to me demonstrates their affection for the Jewish people, and that's enough of organismic unity. I can still be merciful. So God says at the end of time that the way I'll become merciful is that so many Jews will die and the Jews will be angry at me, but in being angry with me, I will tolerate that because it will demonstrate organismic unity. Why? Because without organismic unity, God cannot be merciful. So we see God will do whatever it is to establish organismic unity. God will make the Jews into slaves in Egypt. In order to establish organismic unity, God will allow pogroms to take place in the Crusades, and the Jews should be persecuted in what he called it in the Inquisition. He will allow the pogroms in Europe, in Western and Eastern Europe, for 1,000 years. that the Christians say to the Jews. He will tolerate that. Why? He will tolerate to give them a sense of unity, that if you can't live with unity, then you'll die with unity. And finally, God said, okay, I will even suffer their rage and their anger and their rejection, but as long as they love each other and they care for each other, that's what God said. It's more important, my mercy, and that I have preserved the Jews for eternity. That's the most important thing for me. So the most important thing in human history is a demonstration of organismic unity or organismic closeness. And therefore I will create acts of organismic unity one after another, different levels, slavery, death, pogroms, inquisitions, and so on, crusades. All of these events and destructions of the Jewish people still maintain a certain level of organismic unity, enough so that God can continue in mercy. And that even explains what happened today. What happened in the last 4 years? You also saw a demonstration of organismic unity. How? Because something happened which you didn't notice. What suddenly happened with the liberals and progressives? They became anti-Semites in the universities all over the United States. In most of the universities suddenly demonstrated an anti-Semitism, where they suddenly looked down on Jews, and they threatened Jews, and intimidated Jews, and they allowed all this intimidation to take place. Well, what does this do? Well, guess what? This is another form of organismic unity. That because the Jews don't respect each other and they can't live with each other, so the Jews will be one people. Why? Because they suddenly will become the target. But this is different in Germany. In Germany, all the Germans hated the Jews. But in America, it's only partial. It's mostly the college universities and different groups of pro-Palestinians that hate the Jews and demonstrate against them. That's what's going on. But what is this doing? Why is God allowing this? He is allowing this so that he can have mercy on them. Because whenever the Jews cannot love each other, when they cannot demonstrate an honor and a respect for each other truly and so on, their actus, the fact that they suddenly are angry at everyone who's anti-Semitic. So the anti-Semitism of America suddenly rose up. Never before has America been so openly anti-Semitic. And God allowed it, but it was only a partial anti-Semitism, because America itself and the government did not become anti-Semitic. It's really the college universities and the students in the universities and a lot of these groups, pro-Palestinian groups, that suddenly demonstrated a vicious anti-Semitism. And why does God allow this? Well, it's astonishing. God allowed this because this what establishes organismic unity. That's right. You see, while you saw all this happening and the Jews suddenly became afraid and they unified, and suddenly many Jews suddenly departed from the Democratic Party. Why? Because they saw what the Goyim were doing to the Jews. This partial anti-Semitism suddenly became what? It became evident. So many Jews returned to the Jewish fold, at least in the fact that they were concerned about this, at least in the fact that they demonstrated a unity. So what we see is an amazing thing. It's hard to believe, I understand. But I'll repeat it again for the sake. The way God fundamentally exercises his action of mercy is by making the Zuloso, or the recipient of Olam Haba, from one person, a single person, Adam and Eve, and making them suddenly into a nation, into a people, into an organism. And why? Because that allows God to have mercy. That allows God to treat them all in a single, unified way. So one Jew, therefore, produces the merit that saves another Jew. And when the Jews fail to act like an organism, God then, what he propels on them is suddenly alternative versions of unity. That's right. History is nothing more than the continuous alternative of Jewish hatred. And what does Jewish hatred do? It makes the Jews into a unified people because they are suffering as a unified people. And this allows the action of mercy to continue. So whether it's the Jews die in pogroms or in crusades, or the Jews die in the Holocaust, all of these actions propel Jewish unity. And God says, I am satisfied with this level of unity, because it still means that the Jews are acting as an organism. And finally, he will even allow the Jews to even be enraged at him. Why? Because he wants to save his children. What you don't understand is God loves mankind, all of mankind. And God even loves the Gentiles in a certain way. He does. Because even though the Gentiles cannot construct eternity, but they can live in eternity. A goy can go to Olam Haba, and a lot of people don't know this. In fact, what God did when he told Avraham Avinu, when he told Abraham that he will be the father of a nation, you know what one of the main things he told him? I want you to be blessed by the nations of the world. And God said, that in the way you treat me, God, as a single creator of the universe, I eventually want the Goyim to learn this too, because I love the Goyim too. Those Goyim who are not anti-Semites, these people I love too, and I will give them some form of eternity. So this was a commandment given to Avraham Avinu. That's why Avraham Avinu was such a Baal Chesed. That's why he represented the Midah of Chesed. Why? Because he knew that in a certain way, the way you treat another human being is a demonstration of who you believe God is. So if you treat another human being, any human being, with respect, with honor, or certain dignity, that means that God is the father of both of you, because that other person is part of your family. And therefore God demands that this be done. Now, if God sees that the Jews are not unified, and therefore cannot really represent them in the message, so God will say, I will therefore establish a new form of unity. But this new form of unity, the people will not like. This is going to hurt. So either you establish unity amongst yourself and love among yourself in your own way, and thereby have pleasure in it, or you will establish it in pain. But you will establish one way or another, because if you can't establish your unity, your love and respect for another Jew, in the fact that you don't speak out, and Mechilas, you do not slander the Jews, you do not cheat other Jews. If you will not do it on your own, then I will do it for you. And therefore your death will be the symbol of your unity. But nevertheless, it is still organismic unity. And then God says, and even if you don't do that, I will establish that you will see much anti-Semitism or homicide. You will see this, and therefore you will feel sorry for the Jewish people, and you will understand your affection for Jewish people. So whichever way you want to call it, I will see to it that you will always remain unified on one level or another. And this is the most important principle that is not understood by the Jewish people. What is that principle? That the salvation of the Jews, the redemption of the Jews, the messianic arrival depends on what? On one thing, basically, that no matter how the Jews relate to God, either positively or negatively, there is always an alternative path to redemption. And that alternative path is a demonstration of some form of Jewish unity. So whether or not it's directly treating another Jew with respect and honor, or it's the fact of feeling bad because you've heard that Jews died, or feeling bad because Jews are persecuted, whatever it is, whatever ties you to the Jewish people, God considered an act of Jewish unity. And that allows him to be merciful. So therefore you have to understand the most important thing of all. The most important concept in Judaism is the way we treat our brother is the way we will be redeemed. And that's the fact. It's not even the way we treat God. Because God will forego our love of him. He will forego our honor of him. He will do anything as long as we treat each other as brothers and sisters. That is the single most important concept in Judaism. So in other words, what does this mean for the individual? Every time you do a mitzvah for another Jew, every time you honor another Jew, every time you stop speaking Lashon Hara about another Jew, every time there's some kind of demonstration that you honor and respect and love another Jew, every time you do that, you promote God's mercy. It's that powerful. And every time you do not demonstrate that, every time you speak Lashon Hara, or any time you speak Lashon Hara, or you cheat another Jew, or you're angry at another Jew, every instance of some kind of discord means that God cannot suddenly be merciful. So therefore, every time you forgive another Jew, God then forgives you. God will behave to you exactly in your demonstration of the unity of the Jewish people, because that is the key to mercy. And there is no other key. So therefore, this talk that I'm giving today is perhaps one of the single most important talks of all. It explains why the Mashiach has not come. It explains why the Jews constantly suffer in human history, not because of anti-Semitism, because God allows them to hurt us so that it will arouse in us a certain respect, a certain connection to the Jewish people. God will do whatever it takes to get us suddenly to become one people, one organism. And in that way he can exert mercy, because one Jew in an organism could defend the honor of another Jew. So God is forced to do the same. God says, when you respect each other, when you love each other, then I will demonstrate my love and my respect and my loyalty. Every time a Jew honors another Jew and respects another Jew, or does a chesed to another Jew, you are saying to God, this is my prayer. I am a Jew, and this is the way I will behave, because we are an organism. It says, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. And this is the meaning of the pasuk. Every Jew is a guarantor for every other Jew. Well, I say to God, well, how can I be a guarantor for another Jew? I see another Jew walking up the street. I don't know who he is. I never met him before. So therefore, how can I suddenly have an obligation to be a guarantor for him, to be responsible for him? So God says, you have to be responsible, because you and him are an organism. That's why. That's the concept of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. You and him are part of an organism. You are not strangers. The only reason why you see yourself as strangers, because temporarily I have taken away that knowledge from you. But it's my commandment in the Torah that knowledge be sustained and be repeated, so that someday you will understand what another Jew is. In certain ways, I even consider this more important in terms of your realization of who I am, because I will sacrifice my relationship with you so that I can empower your relationship with another Jew. That's what God has said himself. So therefore we see an amazing concept, that in a certain way God allows us to treat him as the Mashiach. The fundamental purpose of the Mashiach is that he suffers for Klal Yisrael. His suffering is the boon which allows God to be merciful. But in actuality, it's the way we treat another Jew, which is the main stimulus for the act of mercy. And God will even allow himself to become disdained, to allow the Jews to be angry at him. Why? Because if that promotes Jewish unity, if that promotes Jewish love, if that promotes Jewish loyalty, then so be it. Let the Jews be angry at me so that they can express their affection and their feelings about another Jew. I will take that. So in a certain way, God himself becomes the Mashiach. Right? The Mashiach is not only an individual who will have that suffering, but God himself becomes the Mashiach. He takes on the suffering of a father who's abandoned and by his children, who his children feel enraged at him, so that they can love each other. It is more important for a father that he sees his two sons love each other and respect each other, even if it means that they are against him. That's right. It's more important for a father to have peace among his love among the children than to have peace and love between him and his children. That's right. If he had to make the choice, that would be his choice. So therefore we must learn from God. God is willing to take on the suffering of losing his children, losing their loyalty, by them becoming enraged in him. Why? So that they will love each other instead. They will feel bad when bad things are happening to each other. And this is the most important lesson in Kol HaTorah Kula, in the entire Torah. So remember this. Every time you do a mitzvah with another Jew, you are causing God to act mercifully, always. And that mercy saves the Jewish people, and it saves the Goyim. Because every Goy, every non-Jew who is not an anti-Semite will also be in eternity. That's right. Because all humans are the children of God. Absolutely. There is no excuse for killing another human being because you suddenly want him to recognize God. That is the most ridiculous notion for God. Okay, that's the share. Any questions?
Yeah, amazing, Reb Shimon.
Okay. What's that?
I said amazing, Reb Shimon.
Yeah. This year is one of the top shurim that I've ever given to understand what does it mean, Avos Yisrael. You think that Avos Yisrael means simply you have to be nice to another guy. No. Avos Yisrael, the love of another Jew and the respect for another Jew is the stimulus for the act of mercy. That's what makes God merciful. And it all depends on how you treat another Jew in terms of how God will treat you. Okay, thank you very much. And so on. And listen to this year again and again and again. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well.
We wish you a very happy Erev birthday.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, take care.